This is Neutral Bay, only a couple of kilometres from the heart of Sydney. Its peaceful, tree-lined streets are home to some of the best views of Sydney Harbour. But on the night of the 8th of September 2013, that calm was shattered.
Morgan had 28 separate stab wounds in and around his body. Predominantly, these stab wounds were in his back, neck and shoulder areas.
The discovery of the body of local businessman Morgan Huxley would stun the nation.
It happened to someone with no known enemy, someone who was just an ordinary man living in Sydney, living in a great part of Sydney.
The hunt for the perpetrator would reveal a cold-hearted killer.
It was just a game to him. You know, he was treating everyone like they were fools.
What I'm doing is conducting an electronically recorded interview between myself and Daniel Jack Kelsall.
His face was blank the whole time, and there was just a shiver down my spine. This is a dangerous man.
The murder of Morgan Huxley was a crime that shook Australia.
Neutral Bay is a beautiful suburb of Sydney. The schools, loads of parks, greenery. It's full of young people that want to first move out of home. There's a lot of units for young working people so close to the city, and there's a lot of families.
It's fair to say that it's probably considered one of the more affluent suburbs in Sydney. It's close to the harbour, close to the city, so it's a place where people want to live, people want to go out, experience the lifestyle that goes with being in that part of Sydney.
One of the locals was a young man who seemingly kept to himself, someone with no police record and who at the time was looking for work. One of the first stops on his search for a job was the Sydney Cooking School.
He came in off the street and asked if there was any cleaning positions. My first impression was of a geek, you know, thick glasses, skinny, nerdy looking, very shy, but dead stare you in the eye. He said that he had experience as a chef, which turns out he did work at another restaurant not too far away. So we thought, oh great, a kitchen hand with some knife skills experience, which would be great for us. So this was the perfect opportunity for him to do the cleaning and some food prep.
The young man was Daniel Jack Kelsall, and he would go on to commit an act of such brutality that it would shake the serene suburb to its core.
The night in question, we were having a 21st birthday party here. It was 16 girls, 11:30 we kicked them out. I stayed around for half an hour just tidying things up, and Daniel was here to clean up afterwards. Jokingly, I said to Daniel that night, I said, look, you're 22, there's, 16 gorgeous 21-year-olds, and you should pay me to work tonight. And he just laughed and said, I'm not into that sort of thing.
Kelsall spent some time clearing up after the party before leaving work and heading out onto the streets of Neutral Bay. Around the same time, another man, Morgan Huxley, was being dropped off in the town by friends.
Morgan Huxley had returned from an engagement party in Lane Cove to Neutral Bay with a couple of friends. Now, he wanted to have one last drink, but his friends left him and he went off to the Oaks Hotel, which was his favourite pub, for one last drink.
Less than an hour later, the lives of Kelsall and Huxley would collide with tragic and brutal consequences. The following morning, as Brett Deverell headed back to work, He was stunned by what he saw.
I saw that the police had blocked off our rear alleyway, which is where I park. So I stopped and asked if I could go into our garage, and I was told no, this is a crime scene, you need to park somewhere else. And I asked them what was going on, and they said that there had been a murder last night, and the police had basically closed down half the area.
The residents of Neutral Bay woke that morning to shocking news. Overnight, the body of 31-year-old local business owner Morgan Huxley had been discovered. He'd been stabbed multiple times in his own apartment.
A short time after Morgan arrived home, about 1:30, his flatmate heard a knock on the door. She didn't think anything of it and went back to sleep. About 2:30 that morning, she heard noises coming from Morgan's bedroom, and a short time later, she got out of bed and went to his bedroom, where she found him on the floor. Police and ambulance arrived at that location in Neutral Bay shortly after 3 a.m, where ambulance attempted to resuscitate him. Post-mortem examination of Morgan revealed that he had 28 separate stab wounds in and around his body. Predominantly, these stab wounds were in his back, neck, and shoulder areas. One in particular was quite forceful. An examination of Morgan's skull revealed the tip of the blade breaking off in his skull. We commenced by conducting canvasses, speaking to witnesses, neighbours, anyone who saw Morgan at the time. We obtained CCTV from in and around the area, and we also try and piece together what occurred to Morgan prior to his death.
As detectives began their investigation, the last known movements of Morgan Huxley started to emerge.
Morgan Huxley was a young single man. He'd been out celebrating a friend's engagement party. He'd left with some friends in a taxi who dropped him off at his flat at Neutral Bay, and he'd tried to interest them in one last drink at his local watering hole, the Neutral Bay Oaks Hotel, which was a couple of hundred metres from where he lived. They declined, they'd had enough, so Morgan decided to go and have one last one himself.
He stayed there for about half an hour. During that time he had a beer, just sat around watching the television. The pub closed at about 1:30 that morning.
There were no real suspects, but police commenced the investigation and spoke to Morgan's friends and worked out he'd been at the party and had been at the pub, and spoke to staff at the pub who knew Morgan very well. And then they got CCTV footage from Military Road and the outside of the pub. Saw an image of Morgan walking down the street on his way home, and another young man following behind.
This person was seen to be walking and running along Military Road towards Watson Street at the time. We did not know the identity of this person at the time. We believe that he potentially was a chef or worked in a kitchen in and around that area. We base this on the clothing that he was wearing at the time.
This mysterious figure caught on camera was wearing distinctive chef's pants, and he was someone the police were keen to track down. He was one of the last people to have seen Morgan Huxley alive. Was he involved in his death?
A few days later, we saw some guys in suits walking up and down the street. They never stopped, they just were going to all the other restaurants in the area. So our barista that works at the front noticed these gentlemen and a lady, and the barista asked, "Oh, what are you looking for?" They pulled out a picture and they said, "We're looking for this guy in relation to the Morgan Huxley murder." And so our barista said, "Oh, you should have stopped here because he works here."
It was the break police were searching for. They now had to find out more about the suspicious kitchen worker captured on CCTV. And more importantly, where was he now? In September 2013, New South Wales police were investigating the murder of Neutral Bay resident Morgan Huxley.
Morgan Huxley was a small business owner. He lived in a a flat at Neutral Bay. He was popular, he was loved by members of his family. He was just your average bloke living in Sydney.
Not long after Huxley's mutilated body was found in his apartment, detectives uncovered a vital clue. The initial police investigation focused on Morgan's friends and associates, given most murders tend to be committed by someone known to the victim. However, this avenue of inquiry turned up no useful leads, so police decided to review the CCTV in the local area. The footage showed a mysterious figure following Huxley along the street.
So a number of detectives were tasked to speak to shop owners and attend restaurants and cafes and hotels in and around that area in an attempt to identify the person depicted in that image.
It was 2 weeks after the murder when the police visited the Sydney cooking school.
They were like, seriously, you know, this is, yep, he works here. And they said, well, can you call him and get him to come up here, or can we see if he's at home?
On the 24th of September 2013, detectives identified Daniel Jack Kelsall as being the person in that photograph. That afternoon, myself and a number of other detectives from the Homicide Squad and North Sydney went to Daniel Kelsall's home, where he was spoken to.
That night, Daniel was rostered onto work, and he came in and I said, oh, you know, did the police question you? Did you do it? I said, you know, there's a picture of you walking across the street with the guy that died. Oh, just coincidence that, you know, I was just talking to the guy when he was walking home. Then I sort of said, so was it you? And he said, no, not me. He denied everything.
After speaking with investigators at his home, Daniel Kelsall agreed to visit his local police station, where he gave detectives his version of events.
Time, according to me, is 6:41 p.m. on Tuesday, the 24th day of September 2013. I am Detective Senior Sergeant Mark Dukes from the Homicide Squad. What I'm doing is conducting an electronically recorded interview between myself and Daniel Jack Kelsall.
He agreed to come in and told them his story about having finished work at the cooking school and waiting across the road where the fast food shops are, and just passing time, as he often did after work.
For the purpose of this interview, can you just state your full name, date of birth, please?
Daniel Jack Kelsall, born on the 5th of February 1993.
Before Morgan Huxley actually went into the pub, he popped into a convenience store, and Daniel Kelsall, who worked at the nearby Sydney cooking school, was also there at the time.
I walked into the convenience store where the person who I thought is, sure, this guy was trying to get money out of the machine. Very funny.
Morgan tried to use an ATM, and then he left the convenience store, and that's really where the two of them crossed paths.
I then had a small conversation. To this guy, Morgan?
Yes, Morgan, yes.
Morgan asked me if I wanted to use the money, the ATM.
He asked you, sorry.
He asked me. I replied no and then left.
After leaving the convenience store, Huxley made his way to the Oaks Hotel.
Morgan arrived at the Oaks Hotel just after 1 a.m. that morning. He stayed there for about half an hour. During that time, Daniel Kelsall can be seen on CCTV and appears to be watching Morgan, who at the time was inside the hotel. The CCTV depicts Daniel Kelsall looking in the direction towards the Oaks Hotel and where Morgan Huxley was at the time. Morgan stayed at the hotel and left just before 1:30 that morning. He walked along Military Road towards Watson Street, where he lived at the time.
Daniel Kelsall happened to decide to head home himself at the same time that Morgan, who he didn't know left the pub, and told the police that he remembered seeing him. He encountered him at the traffic lights and referred to him as no shoes.
You called him No Shoes.
No, not to his face. No, that's what.
No, sorry, but that's what you said to us.
The name that I had for the person
Correct.
was, No Shoes.
No Shoes. Have you ever seen him before?
No.
Never?
Not to my knowledge.
Sorry?
Not to my knowledge, no. I mean, it's possible that I may have walked like
Sure.
cross paths.
But you don't know him?
No.
Morgan Huxley may not have even noticed Daniel Kelsall at all, but it so happens that Daniel Kelsall, perhaps from this moment, had his eyes on Morgan Huxley.
Daniel Kelsall can also be seen at the time to be walking as well as running behind Morgan, who, unbeknown to him at the time, was being followed by Daniel Kelsall. This is the last time that Morgan Huxley was seen alive.
I'm just going to show the camera there what we're going to show you there, which is camera 7 on their security system.
He was shown the footage as well as an image of himself during the interview. He told us that it was in fact him and he was going home at the time.
Do you know who that is?
It's me. I wasn't wearing a jacket.
So that's the same bag you've got?
Yeah.
Okay, and you said you own a number of those shirts.
Yeah, and a number of pants.
Do you recall, does this assist us in determining what shoes you were wearing that particular night?
He was asked at the time why he was running along Military Road after Morgan Huxley. He told us that his mother had said that if it gets cold, you should go for a jog.
Why'd you jog?
It's cold. Mum always tells me if you're cold, go for a jog.
How far did you jog for?
Not very far.
How far is not very far?
Oh, maybe. I don't know. From the lights, a little bit after the lights, to a little bit before the opening to the restaurant, the Oaks restaurant.
Kelsall was a strange person. He was odd. Some of the responses that he gave at the time appeared a bit different.
I might be the only person to tell you where my boss was as well, but I'm not very good at remembering things.
Sorry, you're not very good at remembering things.
Not fine details, no.
I thought at the time his answer, when I asked him the question about why were you running behind him, I thought that was particularly strange.
Where you were over here on Bimboyd Road, and then you've indicated you've sort of walked back up Military Road, across Watson. If you're cold, I'm just wondering why you would go that way. That doesn't look like the most direct route.
I don't know. I don't. When I get tired, I don't really pay attention to a lot of things. I think it was because I wanted to check in at work, the front of work.
Daniel Kelsall went in for his police interview. He appeared to be pretty calm and pretty certain about what he says had happened.
Have you ever been to his apartment?
That's that block of one of the blocks of apartments there, no.
Correct. No? Never?
No.
He denied that he had ever gone to Morgan's unit or that he knew anything about him.
All right, the time by the machine is 2 minutes past 8 p.m. on the 24th of September 2013. Can I just confirm your name?
Daniel Jack Kelsall.
When I found out that Daniel was a suspect, it was more total shock. I was like in total disbelief. There's no way this weedy little guy was capable of murder. He'd never shown even the slightest bit of aggression or even anger or grumpiness or anything. He just, to me, was like the total opposite person. If I knew 100 people, he would be the last person I would suspect. His favourite shows were like CSI. He loved reading books on crimes and that sort of thing. So I said to Daniel, "Did you do it?" And he said, "No, I definitely didn't do it. If I did do it, there's no way they'd catch me."
We also asked him whether or not he wished to provide a DNA sample for comparison purposes.
I explained to you that we'd recovered some DNA and fingerprints from the crime scene at his house, this gentleman, and that I asked you, were you prepared to provide a sample of your DNA and your fingerprints?
Yep.
And that you told us that you weren't comfortable?
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
At the time, he told us that he felt uncomfortable and did not wish to provide a sample. A number of days later, we found out the reason why.
Detectives investigating the murder of Morgan Huxley were becoming increasingly interested in the movements of Daniel Kelsall, a young kitchen worker spotted on CCTV in the vicinity of the victim on the night of the murder. Kelsall had provided a statement but declined to provide a DNA sample, and to police, that rang alarm bells.
Most people provide a sample at the time. If someone has nothing to hide, then there's no real reason why they wouldn't provide a sample for that particular incident.
During Kelsall's first interview, detectives noticed that he'd arrived at the police station carrying a bag.
When he came back to the police station and during the interview, he was wearing a shoulder bag. This bag became quite significant in a number of days' time.
Not long after giving his statement, Daniel Kelsall got back in touch with the police.
2 days later, on the 26th of September 2013, I received a phone call from him in the afternoon. He told me over the phone that when he spoke to us 2 days prior, he wasn't telling me the complete truth. I arranged to meet him that afternoon, and I drove with another detective to a shopping centre in Neutral Bay.
And that was where Daniel Kelsall essentially told Mark that he hadn't told the truth, that he had actually gone into this man's flat with him, and then on his way out had bumped into or seen a woman entering the unit block, a young woman, a blonde woman.
Kelsall claimed that it was actually this woman who had seen him and was in some way angry about having seen him leave the unit, and he thought that that was the reason. Kelsall's presence there was the reason that Morgan Huxley had ended up getting stabbed, apparently by this unidentified woman.
At the time, I didn't believe what he said. I believed that it was a lie and that Kelsall had been in the unit and had, in fact, left DNA and maybe fingerprints, and that he was now trying to cover up the fact that he had been inside the unit when he'd originally said that he hadn't been. So Kelsall was arrested and taken to North Sydney Police Station.
Now under arrest, Daniel Kelsall refused to answer any more questions and wouldn't even confirm the details of the conversation he'd had with Mark Jukes in the supermarket car park. As detectives hadn't recorded that exchange, Kelsall's version of events was worthless as evidence in any trial. Despite this, the police pressed on and continued the search for clues.
He wasn't charged that night and was allowed to leave the police station. But from that point onwards, he was our primary suspect in relation to the investigation. That night, a number of search warrants were executed on his home address as well as his place of employment, the Sydney Cooking School. During the search warrant and an audit of the knives that were retained at the Sydney Cooking School, it was identified that one particular knife was missing, and this knife was unaccounted for.
For the missing knife, the police rescue squad was brought in. We noticed them here one day, and they had ladders searching roofs. They were lifting up drains. They were searching everywhere, even with dogs looking for that missing knife, but it was never recovered.
Police executed a search warrant at his place and seized a number of items of clothing and a shoulder bag which he invariably had with him, and which he'd had with him and had over his shoulder when he was being interviewed by the police.
Did you have a bag with you?
Yes, this one.
Thank you. And it's that particular bag?
Yes, this one.
So that's what is it? Phillips Fox with was it South Africa?
South African soccer team.
Is that the World Cup?
Yes, I believe it's the Visa. It's a World Cup leopard.
And do you recall what you would have had in that particular bag?
I would have had a apron.
Yes.
My box of Yu-Gi-Oh trading cards.
Of your what, sorry?
Yu-Gi-Oh trading card game.
Okay.
And that would be it. I might have had a food item, but I'm not too sure.
And that shoulder bag was examined and there were a couple of stains which were revealed to be Morgan Huxley's blood.
So Daniel Kelsall was so brazen that he was prepared to take that same shoulder bag to the police interview to be questioned by detectives who were investigating a murder that they strongly suspected he had committed.
The case against Daniel Kelsall received further traction when yet more results arrived from the forensic science labs.
The compelling scientific evidence really fell into three discrete pieces of evidence, each of which pointed to Daniel Kelsall having been in Morgan Huxley's flat and in his room round about the time that he was stabbed to death. The first was the discovery of stains on his shoulder bag. The second was the discovery of a fingerprint of Daniel Kelsall's on the bedroom door, Morgan's bedroom. And the third was some foreign DNA located on Morgan Huxley's penis, which then was matched with Daniel Kelsall's DNA.
The DNA evidence proved that there had been sexual contact between Daniel Kelsall and Morgan Huxley, and the suggestion from Kelsall that this was consensual activity was really described as fanciful by the prosecution in this case, because Morgan Huxley was known to be a heterosexual man, a straight man, and it was highly unlikely that he was going to be engaging in sex with another man in this situation.
Each one of them was a great piece of evidence, but in conjunction, they didn't necessarily point to Daniel Kelsall being the murderer, but they strongly suggested that he was there and thereabouts about the time of Morgan Huxley's death.
Interestingly, what police didn't have was fingerprint evidence on the front door. So it's curious as to how Daniel Kelsall was able to get into the unit without actually touching the door, or perhaps he used some other method to actually make his way inside. The front door was unlocked, so it would have been relatively easy, but he didn't leave fingerprint evidence there to prove that it was him.
On the 8th of October 2013, a month after Huxley's murder, Daniel Kelsall was re-arrested and he was taken back to North Sydney Police Station.
He declined to be interviewed after seeking advice from a solicitor and was charged in relation to the murder of Morgan Huxley. We went to the jail to speak to Daniel Kelsall, and when we first arrived, we were in a small room and we had to obtain DNA from him. We were just all standing around it. He said, pardon the pun, but you could cut the air with a knife. And I don't think I even responded. I just looked at him and thought, that's like, why would you even say that? I knew then that, it was just a game to him. He was treating everyone like they were fools. Someone had been stabbed with a knife 28 times and he's making a reference to a knife, and I just thought it was callous and cold-hearted.
Despite the pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place, for detectives, the job was still far from over.
We don't stop investigating just because someone's arrested. We continue to investigate right up until the time they go to court, and even after. We conducted a number of search warrants on medical professionals where we obtained various forms of evidence. This evidence included conversations that Daniel Kelsall had with various doctors and psychiatrists.
They were quite remarkable because he told both doctors in very, very similar terms about I think the word he himself used was intrusive thoughts he had about following some random stranger home one night and stabbing him to death, which was almost a template for the crime that had been committed.
There was no evidence from any of the medical records of Daniel Kelsall that he had ever experienced any hallucinations, like voices telling him to hurt someone, hearing things, seeing things. There was no indication he'd had any psychotic episode in the past. Just views, thoughts about knives. He'd expressed that view when he'd seen different specialists. This, I believe, was a man who was in a rage, wanted to be violent, and he acted on it. Not because he was psychotic. He was hearing somebody telling him to do it. He wanted to do it, and he did it.
As the trial date loomed, experts probing into the psychology of young Daniel Kelsall weren't prepared for what they would uncover.
When I met Daniel Kelsall and he was talking to me, using words such as care, concern, worry, emotive type words, his face was blank the whole time. And there was just a shiver down my spine that this is a dangerous man. And when I think back to all the serious cases, and I've met numerous individuals that have committed murder, and when I think back to interviewing Daniel Kelsall, there was a coldness and a real fear for my own life when I left that room.
Daniel Kelsall was facing a trial, charged with murdering Morgan Huxley in the Sydney suburb of Neutral Bay in 2013. But even before his day in court, Kelsall's state of mind would come under scrutiny.
I was asked by the prosecution to undertake an assessment of Daniel Kelsall. When I saw him, he was in prison and had been charged with the murder of Morgan Huxley. He struck me immediately as a very intelligent young man who knew exactly what he was doing, and he was prepared for the interview and the assessment process. He was very articulate at the commencement of our interview, saying, "I've been diagnosed with Asperger's. I have autism. And I have a lot of compulsive behaviours, repetitive routines. I don't like mixing with people." And he proceeded to tell me very much the diagnostic criteria of autism. In other words, there's a reason why I'm like I am. And he told me about his history of depression and the different medications he'd taken, and that they really weren't too sure if it was bipolar as well. And so he had a difficult mental health history.
Daniel told us when he started that he suffers from a form of Asperger's. He would always say the same thing over to you like a record. "Hi, how was your day? Are you okay?" sort of thing, or "How was your day?" I was like, "Oh, great, no problems." But he would say that over and over again throughout the day.
It's very unusual to interview an offender that will give you this background from the moment you meet them. So I got the impression he was very much trying to convince me this is a symptom of my disorder. However, as I proceeded to interview him, his eye contact was very piercing. He wasn't concerned about looking at you straight in the eye, which is quite unusual for anyone with autism. They're quite reluctant to give you that eye contact.
Obviously, I thought that he was strange and that during the investigation he was playing games, trying to seek attention, but overall I didn't think there was anything wrong with him.
You've indicated that you have autism, is that correct?
Yes.
What do you mean? What sort?
It hasn't been classified because it was caught so late on in life that I've already adjusted to having it. I haven't taken any concrete tests by my psychologist. I have seen a psychologist, and I've been diagnosed with this. I don't actually know what specific level on the autism scale it is, but it does impede some functioning in everyday life.
Like what?
I can't tell balance. I can't tell measurement of any kind. So measurement of time, measurement of object, in any type of measurement, I can't instinctively tell easy enough to. So I can't, like, a pinch of salt. I can't do a same pinch of salt. So you ask me to do 2 pinches of salt, they will not be the same. You ask me to guess your measurement, I would not be able to at all. I wouldn't be able to say you're about this height because I just can't tell in any way.
Dr. Susan Pullman, who assessed Daniel Kelsall in custody, really saw through him. He had been assessed by a number of doctors over the years, and there were a number of diagnoses of several different conditions, but really she was able to get to the nub of the fact that Daniel Kelsall knew exactly what he was doing.
So I undertook an assessment of him as part of trying to understand his thinking, and did he fit this pattern of having very poor social understanding of people's emotions and thoughts. Because with autism, they can have difficulty reading people's emotions and understanding what someone is thinking. Daniel Kelsall had very good understanding of what people were doing and what they were thinking. He also proceeded to tell me that he's got different compulsions, different repetitive behaviours, like I take my glasses off and I have to tap the side of my glasses each time I take them off and put them back on. So I noticed that during our interview, which lasted some time, that he took his glasses off several times, and not once did he tap the side of them, as he said he would always do as part of his compulsive behaviour.
When looking at Daniel Kelsall's mental health, yes, he was socially awkward, but there's a big jump from being socially awkward to dreaming of murdering someone to then actually fulfilling that dream.
We often feel that when somebody commits such a heinous crime, like Daniel Kelsall, that they must be mentally ill. Why would you do this? What motivates somebody to stab someone so many times? What for? He didn't know this man. He was a stranger. Why kill someone so viciously like that? For what reason? This was not a mental illness. Before I did this program, I spoke to a number of colleagues about, should I do this? Because when this young man does get out, will he commit a crime like that again? And as it stands now, I believe he would.
The psychological analysis of Daniel Kelsall confirmed he was fit to stand trial. Despite the mounting weight of evidence against him, he confounded police, the press and the public by pleading not guilty to the murder of Morgan Huxley.
I was surprised that it went to trial. I thought the evidence that we had was overwhelming, and I was surprised that he pleaded not guilty to the murder.
That's quite typical of those psychopathic traits. They don't accept responsibility. Everything's everybody else's fault, not theirs. And he doesn't admit to anything. I didn't do it. I didn't do it.
Daniel Kelsall's trial began at Sydney Supreme Court in March of 2015, and from the outset, he was at the very centre of the media spotlight.
Daniel Kelsall was a pretty odd sort of character. He was socially awkward, introverted, and perhaps not used to getting an awful lot of attention from people. This trial saw the eyes of everyone in this courtroom and so many others who were watching and listening at home. Their attention and their gaze was suddenly focused on this young man, and in a perverse sort of way, he appeared to enjoy it.
He wanted to be asked these questions. He enjoyed being in the paper. He enjoyed being photographed. Very narcissistic. He lapped it up. very egotistical. He wanted to demonstrate that he was superior to everybody else. He is going to outsmart everybody else.
Early in the police investigation, one line of inquiry focused on the personal life of Morgan Huxley and whether it had played a part in his tragic death.
There was a lot of media interest in this at the time. A lot of it centred around female friends of Morgan. Morgan was a popular, attractive guy, and the media portrayal of him at the time deeply affected, his family.
The early press coverage of this case was obviously very hurtful to the Huxley family, so much so that it was still on their minds at the end of the trial. And we know from the victim impact statements that we heard in court that it was still weighing heavily on them, that this idea that Morgan Huxley was in some way responsible for his own murder based on this theory, which didn't turn out to be true, had stuck with them, and they obviously believed that a perception of Morgan was out there from very early on. I think this case was a real lesson for the media that the way a story is covered can hurt those who are directly involved, and sometimes that hurt doesn't go away.
One of the most notable moments of the trial was when the defendant himself took the stand.
Not all accused people actually give evidence, but he chose to, and he needed to, because he needed to give the jury a version that could be believable to them, to give them some doubt about his guilt. Of course, he failed in that aim, but when he was giving that evidence, and of course he was questioned by his own barrister and also the Crown prosecutor in the case, he was really trying to give a version that the jury could take away and somehow believe. It was clear to most people in the court that he was lying, particularly to members of Morgan Huxley's family. And as some of those lies were told, there was the odd gasp coming from the body of the court.
Daniel Kelsall's defence at the time was that Morgan invited him back up to the unit and where they participated in consensual sex. When he said this, it was like when I spoke to him on the 26th of September. I didn't believe one word that he said, that it was complete fabrication and complete lies. I never at one stage believed him what he was saying.
The trial lasted about 2 weeks, and after the jury had gone out, eventually they came back with their verdict, and that verdict was guilty, which was an enormous relief to those who loved Morgan Huxley.
For the murder of Morgan Huxley, Daniel Kelsall was sentenced to a minimum of 30 years in prison.
If you ask me what I've learnt from a crime like this, is that anyone's capable of murder. It just seemed that he was the last person I'd ever expect, because of his gentle nature, to be such a horrible, murderer.
I've covered plenty of murder trials over the years, and usually it's a situation where the victim is known by the accused. It might be a family member, it might be someone who was involved in some sort of argument or dispute prior. But the random nature of this made it so unusual. The fact that it happened in a fairly affluent part of Sydney, it happened to someone with no known enemies. Little could he have imagined that that brief interaction with Daniel Kelsall in a convenience store would see him ultimately pursued, followed, stalked all the way to his own home and viciously stabbed.
The one thing I will say about this murder, not the trial necessarily, but the murder, was that there's usually a reason, there's usually a motive, and this one was just bizarre, not for the ferocity or the brutality of it, unfortunately, that happens a lot, but just why? The randomness of it.
In my 20 years in this field, having met Daniel Kelsall, having met hundreds of offenders, he's the one offender that I fear more than anyone.